Hi everyone, welcome to panel 6B, which is Esculent Performance Across Time. And yes, I did have to check how to pronounce that. So we have three fantastic papers today. I'm really excited about them because so many of these deal with texts that I really love. So what I'm going to do is I'll introduce everyone individually, let them deliver their paper, and then at the end, as per usual, we'll do a Q&A. So our first speaker today is Blake Overman from Indiana University, Bloomington, and he's talking about Longlegs. The title of his paper is Let Me In, Longlegs and the Invasion of Independent Cinema.
Great. Thank you so much, Miranda, for that lovely introduction. It is something that I've been very much looking forward to, getting to talk about this movie ever since I saw it in theaters last year. It was something that kind of like sparked something in my neurons that said, you need to talk about this film. And, this is just my prediction. I do think that it will get into the kind of cult scene eventually, just because of how divisive the reception of the film was. And part of my presentation today is going to be talking about that divisiveness, but also I recognize that this is still a fairly new film, so I'm not going to be talking very much about the plot itself, more talking about how the plot is framed, how the advertising materials kind of cue us in as to what we would expect from a film like Longlegs, and ultimately how those expectations are subverted through the film itself. But again, this is going to be a spoiler-free presentation. I have included my email. This is a fully fleshed out seminar paper already, so if you would like to do further reading, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to send along my paper for you to read in more detail, but for the presentation today, it's going to be a more lecture-y kind of presentation. We'll watch some videos. One of the beautiful things about film, I think, is to have a shared kind of image to all consume. And why not do that? Why not take this opportunity here at the conference to practice some of this theoretical stuff that I'm going to be talking about anyway. So, as you know, the title from this presentation, if you've seen the film, comes from a very uncomfortable opening scene in which Nicolas Cage's character starts doing this kind of bizarre, almost magical feeling kind of witchy spell in which he's singing this song that includes this line that says, "Let me in now." And I thought about the different ways that intrusion and kind of hiding and deceit has been such a ubiquitous thing with horror, and the many ways in which the construction of Longlegs as a monster is not only reinforced through some of the marketing strategies that the ingenious marketing team for this film employed, as we'll kind of go over. I think the marketing campaign was something that was really what cemented so many people to see this independent film that, yes, had star power, but I think there's plenty of films that are out there that can point to say that sometimes an actor is not enough. I think the marketing was just the cherry on top that created the sort of phenomenon that was the film's success. Just my last little bit of introduction, I think one of the kind of quintessential things about a film like Longlegs, which is both horror but also police procedural. Police procedurals have a precedent set in films like The Silence of the Lambs, which has been oftentimes compared to Longlegs, as with Seven, with Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt. The notion that the mystery is very much tied into a sort of true crime mimetic experience where you're slowly unveiling each, piece by piece, kind of creating that sort of Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia map, where at the end of it you're madly kind of reaching at this giant plot point. But as I will cover in this presentation, I think one of the most frustrating things and what has led to the divisiveness of Longlegs is the third act saying, all those pins you put up on that board, I'm going to take them off. I'm going to take them off, and you're left with a completely disoriented feel. That is upsetting. It's a sort of maybe Lynchian refusal of catharsis. But let's, without further ado, let's get into it. So the research questions that I came into this project with were twofold. First, how are viral marketing strategies crucial for the success of independent horror cinema to really create a mark, to get their films seen? I think oftentimes when you have something like, I don't know, to use an example, something like the Conjuring series has become so kind of iconic that it really doesn't need much marketing for itself. You see something like that, you know what you're going to get. It is the steak and potatoes of jump scare horror. You know, nothing's going to upset you when you sit down. You know what you're getting yourself into. With something like an independent horror film, and as I'll talk about, I do want to trace a little bit of a historical timeline of independent cinema and horror. They have to try much harder to get people to see this kind of infant project, whatever it might be. So a lot of the time when we are presenting with something new, we have to be convinced to go out and see it. So one of those driving questions then becomes, okay, well, how does this virality manifest? What sort of things, what are the characteristics of a marketing campaign that has to pull in the consumer? The second question is, to what extent then does it become a metatextual critique in the film itself of the need to market itself as one thing, to get people to view things, to draw people into the mystery, to set up a sort of expectation so that people will consume the material, but also how those the expectations then become something that can be played with, that can be toyed with, that can become a sort of narrative tool in itself, where not only is the marketing playing on expectations, but that same level of expectations that's being played upon in the marketing strategy then translates itself into the narrative and mystery itself. So a lot of the ideas that I'm tapping to come from the concept of hegemony. Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony, kind of complicated with Alison Jagger's emotional hegemony, basically establishing that the horror genre and the ways that horror has marketed itself has created this sensation or this promise of sensation that we, the viewer, whenever we are trying to be enticed to see a horror film, we expect to be affected in some way. As we know, like there's plenty of horror films out there that will emphasize things like audience members vomiting, having to give dog bags in case of being so scared. I have a kind of a funny personal epithet. My grandma, who is, the ripe age of 70 now, recounted the first time she saw The Exorcist and how she fainted at that film and how terrifying it was to go through that experience. So it has certainly a large pedigree of this emotional promise that when you watch a horror film, something is going to happen to your body. And as I'll discuss later in the concept of body genre, it's very much tied in affect, and therefore, in order to tease, to titillate the audience, the marketing itself becomes emotional. It becomes effective in order to say, you just got a taste of that bodily sensation. Wait until you see the film. These two concepts of hegemony, the idea that the institutions that we are taking part of have established some level of power, even though it's not tangible. It's a soft sort of power where these beliefs have been ingrained in us. And I want to interrogate that by not only looking at an analysis of Longlegs, but again, tracing a timeline of the multiple instances across time, at least in American cinema, that are examples of this sort of emotional, affective marketing really paying off. So just a little bit of information about Longlegs. These are bits of information where I don't typically focus in on financial success as a means to justify critiquing and or analyzing a work. But when we're talking about something that kind of proves the point that I'm making, that the marketing campaign was quite successful, is we're dealing with a film that was distributed by Neon, which Neon is had a very, very long-running win streak of just doing very well at independent cinema festivals. So very much, if you get distributed by Neon and you're an independent film, it's probably going to be pretty good. You're going to be received well. They've won multiple consecutive Palme d'Ors at the Venice Film Festival, or yes, sorry, the Cannes Film Festival, and a long-running pedigree. But the success of that was also emphasized not only in that this was not a sort of art house cinema film, but was instead marketing again as this horror police procedural film. So it was made on a shoestring budget for at least a large-scale production, and became the highest-grossing independent film of 2024. So what makes this so interesting to me is that it's being distributed by an art film distribution company that is then able to play on this sort of marketing strategy in a very artistic way, in my opinion. And much of the plot of the film, like I said, this is going to maintain kind of the spoiler-free status, is the mystery that is being presented to us in Longlegs, and how the main character, who's named Lee Harker, for any of us kind of Victorian novel readers, is going to be something that kind of instantly cues us into the sort of texts that are being referenced. Again, Longlegs is a monster that is representative of many kind of times and space. He's somebody who physically appears to be somebody from like the Age of Aquarius, kind of satanic panic, a very kind of odd, pale ghost of that period, quite literally, all white person. And I think in narratively, and talking about monstrosity and the kind of the titillation of the monster under the bed, he quite literally is somebody who inhabits an underground space. Again, I can't get into too much detail, but that how the marketing itself of this film is playing on this the kind of titillation of the monster being present in the room with you, but not seeing it, and how concealment of that monster can become such a titillating experience. So before we get into this, I want to get into the expectations. What are our expectations of when we see or are marketed a film like this, and what can we, as the audience, kind of go in expecting to get out of such an experience? So I had mentioned a bit ago that body genre is something that is very much been equated with horror for a long time. Body genres, as defined by scholars such as Carol J. Clover and Barbara Creed and Joan Hawkins from my own Indiana University, have established that the line between horror and other body genres, such as pornography, are very, very thin. It's a thin line, easily crossed over oftentimes as well. It's the reason that when we talk about slasher films, we cannot ignore the topic of things like teen sexuality. A lot of that experience, though, sets up the expectations that when we watch something that is of the body genre, we will be affected in some way. It's very much built on the expectation that as the viewer, we are arresting ourselves. We are willingly putting ourselves in a position to be manipulated emotionally or physically in some way. We cringe at the sight of somebody being stabbed, or a wound, an open wound bleeding, just as much as we might be aroused at a sexual act being performed in a pornographic film. So that in itself becomes an expectation. As I mentioned earlier, Longlegs is also coming from a long line of kind of conceived genre conventions when it comes to not only the slasher film, the monster film, and the police procedural. Each of those things have built-in genre conventions that can then either be reinforced or played with. And I think oftentimes, while the marketing strategy, as we'll see when we get to the examples, is promising to adhere to those genre conventions, the narrative itself is playing with it, creating the frustration that many of the people who disliked the film, I think, missed. You missed the point that it is meant to make you upset because it's playing with these genre conventions in many ways. Setting up that expectation, I want to see how the advertising of this movie really leans into that bodily promise, the experience that when you watch this film, you are going to feel it. You're going to be part of the engagement so intensely that it's not only something that we think of cognitively, but we feel sensually. So I have two of the clips from the marketing campaign. One is just the official trailer. The other one is a trailer that is titled Heartbeat.
Is it scary being a lady FBI agent?
Yeah.
Take a nice long look. A letter was left with the bodies. Signed with one word.
I saw a beast rise up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his horns he wore 10 crowns. On each head was written a blasphemous name.
What aren't you telling me?
He'll kill and kill again.
I know you're not afraid of a little bit of dark. Because you are the dark.
Do you still say your prayers?
Never once. They scared me.
Hello?
You could have made nice with me. But you didn't. And that has led to all of this. I'll be waiting.
Okay, so as you can see there, the trailer that launched this whole campaign starts with a giant knock. Boom, 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 boom. So right from the beginning, it's like an auditory sensation of experiencing it. You can see how it plays with this whole notion of the hidden creature. We hear Longlegs' voice, but we don't see his face. It's something, an immaterial kind of thing that is teasing us. Like, oh, I know that you can stand a little bit of dark. It's something that is inviting us to experience this kind of fear that this film is going to provide. Again, it's that kind of monster in the closet, monster in the bedroom experience, which, if you have seen the film, is very much in line with how this killer operates. It's somebody who's operating behind the wings. He describes himself as a friend of a friend of a friend, a disciple of the Mr. Downstairs, whatever it might be. A lot of the dialogue very much is keen into these visual practices that are happening in the marketing of the actors on the set of Texas Chainsaw Massacre would speak of how Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface, the kind of the ubiquitous character with that film, would be concealed from the actors, so that when the first time they saw Gunnar Hansen and this huge, who's this massive man, like 6'3", 300 pounds, huge dude, in like a skin mask, and he's like smelly and sweaty from being in it for so many hours in the Texas heat, that it was genuine shock when he would step out and beat them over the head with a sledgehammer or cut into them with a chainsaw. Like the kind of story in itself became something that would draw people in. So let's see, get back into the presentation. Perfect. So it brings me to this observation that independent horror film has very much relied on not only a sensory sort of thing, right? This is where I would say it's not only an expansion of cultural and emotional hegemony, but also the promise of it being real has become something that is so important to the success and the marketing of a successful horror film. Another, the found footage film, you know, the kind of foundational found footage film that has become something that can't be divorced from talking about that subgenre is the Blair Witch film, or the Blair Witch Project, which in its marketing was very much leaning into not only the genre of found footage being a something that is very much playing upon verisimilitude, that when we watch a found footage film, it's as if we are watching something that really happened in real life, but would also publish things like websites that featured police reports or local news stories of these three kind of unwitting teenagers going lost in the woods searching for this folk tale of the Blair Witch. I even have the example as far back of the 1931 Frankenstein, when prior to the film starting, a man comes out, Edward Van Sloan, comes out onto a stage and says, the events that you are about to see might horrify you, they might even shock you, but if you can survive them, then awesome. I hope you enjoy it. That was a very bad paraphrase, but you get what I'm saying. So, what did Longlegs do? It also inserted itself into real life. Billboards were kind of posted to remind us that these kind of mysterious kind of things are own codes to sort of decode, to get into the story before the mystery has even started, before the film has been released. There is also news articles that were posted, kind of little bits in the Seattle Times that featured this cryptic sort of serial killer, Zodiac killer code that was cueing us in like, oh man, this is like something very bizarre, something very close to home, something that has invaded our own world, right? And I also have the link here of the Birthday Murders website. Let me see if I can pull this up. Because the link was not working. All right, well, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to get the link to work, but it is a very much similar kind of created website that features these news articles about the different families that have been murdered, the different victims, and creates this sort of sensation of the real. That the creature, again, is very much something that is inseparable from our own sort of reality. So, with that, I hope that we establish some of those kind of genre conventions, the expectations of independent horror film, and you can see how not only they played out in Longlegs, but led to its very, unanimous success. And I would love to talk more about how it gets into the narrative, but in the interest of keeping it spoiler-free, I couldn't. Again, my email is at the beginning of this presentation. Let me see if I can get back to it real quick. If not, I can show you all later. But if you would like to read more about my thoughts on this topic, please email me and I can send you my whole written seminar paper on this topic. Thank you so much, and I appreciate you all coming out.
So our next speaker is Kate Rutherford, also from Indiana University, Bloomington, and her presentation is entitled An Insatiable Illness, Examining Sickness in Julia Ducournau's Raw.
All right, thank you so much, Miranda. I want to start out by saying that unlike Blake, who had a very fleshed out seminar paper, this is more of a work in progress. I am not a scholar in monster studies, although I am becoming increasingly interested in the field. And so there are things that I might have missed and things that I really want to learn from, and a lot of ideas too that I just haven't had the time to incorporate, and I also think due to the time constraints of the presentation, I haven't been able to incorporate. So with that being said, I will go ahead and get started. It is apparent at the beginning of Julia Ducournau's 2016 film Raw, known in French as Grave, that the lead character, Justine, played by Garance Maralier, has been raised a strict vegetarian. On their way to drop her off at veterinary school, Justine's parents take her to a cafe, where her mom becomes viscerally upset upon her daughter being nearly exposed to meat. Soon after arriving at school, without the oversight of her parental caregivers, Justine becomes the victim of several hazing rituals, including the forced ingestion of a raw rabbit kidney. Shortly after, she develops a rash accompanied by an insatiable appetite for meat. Her appetite escalates until, eventually, Justine becomes cannibalistic. It is subsequently revealed that Justine's sister, Alexia, Ella Rumpf, also suffers from cannibalistic urges, satisfying her desire for human blood by causing car crashes on a desolate road and taking her victims as her meals. At the film's conclusion, Alexia ends up killing and consuming Justine's, quote, gay but curious friend, roommate, and eventual lover, Adrian. Alexia is imprisoned and Justine is sent back home, where her father reveals that cannibalism is a genetic trait passed through the women of their family, lifting his shirt to reveal numerous scars across his abdomen left by Justine's mother. This presentation will examine Justine as a sick figure, and Alexia a little bit as well, positing that the film complicates her positionality as a monster by also establishing her as the victim of sickness. Of course, a horror film centering on a sick character is far from an anomaly. The pervasiveness of sickness in horror is well documented. One need not look far to find tropes of zombies, plagues, epidemics, and contagion through popular depictions of monsters. However, the complicated manner in which Justine's disease comes to inhabit her is relatively unique in the horror genre. Her sickness comes not from a virus, nor is she the victim of an environmental catastrophe. She's not bitten by a vampire or overtaken by a parasite, though her sickness is brought on by consumption. On the one hand, Justine was born with a genetic proclivity to engage in cannibalism. On the other hand, this proclivity needed to be activated through the consumption of meat. Like many monsters, Justine is the victim of an ugly fate that is brought upon her against her will. I argue that Justine's fate can be read as a sickness, complicating her monstrosity, and perhaps shifting how we view the development of her relationships over the film's diegesis. Throughout this presentation, I will be heavily reliant on the word sickness as opposed to other alternatives. Various scholars, such as Anne-Marie Moll, have demonstrated a distinction between physical disease and social manifestations of illness. I use the term sickness as an overarching term that encompasses both the impacts of both disease and illness and any relevant condition that falls outside of the confines of these terms. As previously noted, while Justine and Alexia's bloodlust is portrayed as monstrous, it feels unlike most traditional notions of monstrosity in horror. Nonetheless, Ducournau's portrayal of the sisters seems to call on archetypal monsters. I suggest that calling upon these monsters helps to establish the sisters as sick characters. I use the terms traditional and archetypal a bit loosely here, as I recognize that monsters have complex histories. When I discuss the vampire, note that my mind goes to Stoker's Dracula and his female companions. Furthermore, in my discussion of werewolves, like Elizabeth A. Lawrence, I recognize that, quote, the contemporary human wolf has been inspired largely by cinematic representations, end quote. In discussing the werewolf, I am broadly drawing on representations portrayed in late 20th century films. I will subsequently discuss how Ducournau's representation of cannibalism complicates the figure of the female vampire. I will first briefly examine how the sisters can be viewed as werewolf-like figures. The fact that Justine and Alexia can be read as akin to both vampires and werewolves is perhaps no surprise. As Barbara Creed notes in her seminal work, The Monstrous Feminine, there are close mythological associations between the vampire and the werewolf. In horrors, Drake Douglas points to the ancient belief that the vampire could transform into the werewolf, and the latter, upon its death, could become a vampire. Creed also discusses how the werewolf's monthly transformation can be linked to the menstrual cycle. Unlike the werewolf, Justine and Alexia's cannibalism is not restricted to a particular time of the month. However, their transformation is entangled with their sexuality, a point that I will further investigate later. This is reflective of James B. Twitchell's assertion that, quote, modern horror myths prepare the teenager for anxieties of reproduction. They are fables of sexual identity. However, unlike the film that Twitchell examines, Raw would likely fall among the films that Creed terms as, quote, being told from the perspective of a female rite of passage. I suggest that the transformative aspect of the girls works in tandem with their meat lust to associate them with the werewolf. While Ducournau's film would fit into the category delineated by Creed of the meat movie, it differs from many of its predecessors in A, unlike movies like Night of the Living Dead, Justine and Alexia are fully aware of their cannibalistic proclivities and their potential consequences, but B, unlike movies such as The Hills Have Eyes, they hold no pleasure in the suffering of their victims. Even when it becomes clear that Alexia has begun to commit premeditated murder by staging car crashes to satisfy her bloodlust, she does so simply to have easy access to meat, rather than to relish sadistically in the suffering of her victims, complicating the Cartesian notion of mind-body dualism. This complication is also expressed earlier in the film, when Justine appears to value animal life more than her counterparts during a lunchroom conversation, though soon afterwards she succumbs to meat lust and cannibalism. The combination of these factors lends the sisters an animalistic quality, unlike many cannibals, establishing a clear connection, a clear association with the werewolf and shattering the binary between human and animal. Furthermore, like the werewolf, the girl's body undergoes obvious physical transformation. These physical transformations firmly establish the presence of disease and mark the beginning of the girl's journey as, quote, sick characters. Though they are not victims of the fever that often signals the start of transformation in many depictions of the werewolf, after first eating meat, it is suggested that both sisters develop severe rashes. These rashes seem to disappear once they indulge in their cannibalistic desires. Although their corporeal transformations are limited compared to those of the classic werewolf, like werewolves, the sisters' transformations seem to mirror the reality of life with chronic sicknesses. Just as the werewolf's animalistic state is temporary, however, the girl's symptoms can be managed through prescription cream or, more disturbingly, through the consumption of flesh. However, perhaps one of the key differences between the werewolf and the cannibal, as portrayed in Raw, is how Justine and Alexia's symptoms seem to mimic withdrawal. This ties the sisters not just to a broad range of chronic illnesses, but establishes a firm connection to addiction. In his review of the film, Sean Donovan writes that Justine's tale is told through the, quote, narrative language of addiction. Of course, literal addiction is not an uncommon characteristic of the monster. Through their bloodlust, vampires in particular have been categorized as the penultimate example of addicts. And then I have a quick note here to draw upon the fact that I think many of us recall Edward Cullen famously calling Bella Swan in Twilight his own personal brand of heroin. So while Justine and Alexia are not vampires, they arguably are persuaded by a similar bloodlust. Like the vampire women of Dracula, the way in which Justine and Alexia consume the flesh of others arguably positions, quote, their demonism through the power to penetrate, attributed to Kraft. Since Ducournau makes clear that the sisters' sicknesses are due to a genetic trait passed only through the women of their family, their uniquely gendered experience and how it functions against viewer expectations helps to establish a connection between the girls and the archetypal monsters who are perhaps most well known for, quote, expressing and distorting sexual energy. Like their vampire predecessors, Justine and Alexia complicate hegemonic notions of power and sexuality. However, as Creed notes, female vampires often leverage their sexuality and seduce the men that they ultimately slaughter. In contrast, we see Justine enter the veterinary school as a virgin, awkward and unsure about sex. As other scholars and reviewers have noted, Justine's bloodlust is deeply entangled with and reflective of her sexuality. Justine's progressive entanglement with sex not only mirrors the development of her cannibalism, but it also seems to heighten the intensity of her urges. For instance, in what Donovan argues is perhaps the most disturbing scene of the film, as part of the hazing, quote, Justine is doused with a bucket of blue paint and paired with a male, first year in yellow paint, then told by a senior student to make green. As she kisses her classmate, Justine's primal instincts seem to take over. She bites off her classmate's lip, or solid chunk of it at least, some remnants of which she later picks out of her teeth in the shower. Similarly, it is evident that when Justine sleeps with Adrian, she appears to become increasingly hungry for meat and blood as her arousal rises. As she appears to orgasm, Justine, quote, bites into her own flesh, overcome by the desire to consume and be consumed, attributed to Delaw, a reaction that is reconciled at the end of the film when Justine's father reveals the scars that he has received at the behest of her mother. Although, like many female vampires, Justine's sexuality and monstrosity can be viewed in tandem, Justine's sexuality differs in that it can be read as a secondary symptom of her disease. While Justine's sexual development and transgression of sexual norms are important to the film in many ways, Justine's sexuality is tainted due to its entanglement with her cannibalistic addiction. While she is arguably afforded a disruptive power through her cannibalistic sexuality, Justine's sexuality will also always be tethered to her monstrosity, not in a way that she wishes to weaponize like some of her female vampire predecessors, but in a way that limits the relationships she can have with others. Not only does Ducournau's film demonstrate the space occupied by the sexuality of young women and how it plays into the monstrous feminine, but the enmeshment that Ross shapes between addiction and sexuality seems to mirror the complex conundrum faced by those afflicted with sexually transmitted diseases. Although I want to approach this topic with the utmost care, it would be remiss for me not to draw a parallel between the body of someone suffering from HIV at the height of the epidemic and Justine's body. But that said, I want to be very clear that I am aware that this parallel is reductive, and I want to be clear, too, that I am not arguing that Justine's body is representative of the HIV-inflicted body. Rather, simply there are similarities between the two. The vilification of those with HIV is well documented, the bodies of those with HIV often being portrayed as embodying monstrous qualities in early journalism. It is no secret that the bodies of those with HIV were seen as a scapegoat for which to ascribe fears of sexuality, in addition to destabilizing binary notions of sick and healthy. Just as the extent of Justine's sickness is not evident from the beginning, she simply develops a horrific rash, the same can be said about many afflicted with HIV, demonstrating the complexities surrounding asymptomatic or nearly asymptomatic diseases. Furthermore, just as was the case for the earliest HIV patients, Justine's sickness is not clear. There's ambiguity in where the urges come from, as this is not fully revealed until the film's conclusion. However, perhaps one of the key differences between Justine and those with HIV is the moral impetus ascribed to HIV patients, famously described by Susan Sontag. While the viewer of the film recognizes that those with whom Justine engages sexually are likely to be harmed, the perspective of the camera affords Justine empathy. An inside look at the pervasive hazing culture at Justine's veterinary school disrupts hegemonic notions of responsibility. Though the viewer may be disgusted by some of Justine's actions, they are not led to place the blame on Justine's quote-unquote lifestyle, despite it being riddled with partying and drinking. Instead, they are shown an array of contributing factors, such as peer pressure, family pressure, and Justine's burgeoning sexuality. For instance, at the beginning of the film, Justine initially refuses to eat the rabbit kidney that triggers her cannibalism. Subsequently, Alexia not only pressures her, but nearly forces her to eat the raw kidney without her consent, shoving the piece of meat into Justine's mouth. By heavily integrating, quote, lifestyle factors that have historically been used as ammunition against people with HIV into Justine's experience, Ducournau suggests that blame for sickness cannot be easily placed. In addition to fostering empathy for Justine's sexuality, Ducournau also skillfully affords the viewer an empathetic lens with which to view Justine's blood/meat lust. While many vampires and cannibalism suffer from insatiable bloodlust, their compulsion often feels fictional. By contrast, Justine's addiction feels oddly realistic, like the actual sickness of drug and alcohol addiction that her cannibalism arguably reflects. I posit that the relatability of Justine's addiction is accomplished through Ducournau's employment of shame. Several decades ago, Paul O'Halloran and Wayne M. Wellman wrote that, quote, hidden alcoholics, those who drink surreptitiously to keep their addiction secret, far outnumber the overt habitues of Skid Rows. The former rather than the latter should be considered, quote, typical alcoholics. an observation that likely still holds true. The vigilance with which Justine fights to keep her growing dependence on meat a secret, the shame that Justine encounters when her vice is discovered, and her determination to seek the consumption of flesh despite her embarrassment when caught, all point to the reality of addiction that horror either often reduces or ignores completely. For instance, in one scene, the camera flashes to Justine in the cafeteria, where she is making her way down a buffet line beside Adrian. Awash in red light illuminating the buffet, Justine glances back after passing a tray of burger patties before quickly reaching into the tray, grabbing a patty with her bare hand and shoving the patty into the pocket of her lab coat. Subsequently, the cashier at the end of the line confronts Justine, asking what she took. At first, Justine pretends that she does not know what the cashier is talking about, but ultimately pulls the patty out of her pocket, averting her eyes as the cashier charges her for the meat. As she and Adrian walk away from the register, and Adrian calls her actions effed up, Justine continues to avert her eyes and to the point that Adrian, annoyed, snaps his fingers in her face in a bid to win Justine's attention. Soon afterwards, we see Justine and Adrian at a gas station. Before biting into a meaty sub-sandwich, Justine tells Adrian that she, quote, can't if he watches. Then, in the next scene, Adrian catches Justine in the pair's mini fridge. As soon as she hears Adrian behind her, Justine jumps slightly, turns around, and with a guilty expression painted on her face, tells him that she was just getting milk for cereal. Doubt clouds Adrian's expression as he walks away, and Justine reopens the door to the mini fridge. As if she has opened the door to heaven, Justine leans into the fridge and, awash in its white light, takes a sniff of raw meat. And that's the photo that we see here. I believe it's chicken. Appearing to be on a euphoric high, Justine then takes a large bite. Justine's shame not only elicits empathy from the viewer, but also deepens her relationship with her sister while hindering her relationships with others. She is acutely aware that no one else in her school would understand her cravings and their deeply inappropriate nature. Her desire to hide her cravings echoes the loneliness often expressed by those suffering from illness, addiction, and substance abuse. Justine's shame also humanizes her, adding complexity to her monstrosity that is not often afforded to the cannibals of most meat movies. Of course, it is difficult to reference Justine's shame without examining her meat lust in tandem with her sexual lust, as Justine's shame is also reflected in her sexuality. Unfortunately, this is not something that I have time during this presentation to discuss at length, but I do think it is worth noting that Justine and Alexi's relationship can at times be read as sexual. For instance, as in perhaps the film's most infamous scene, for instance, as in perhaps the film's most infamous scene in which Alexia's finger is cut off and consumed by her sister, in which the finger can be seen as both phallic and incestuous, a point that is also suggested by Ursula de Liu. Furthermore, in addition to examining the sexual taboo that is arguably represented in the film, it is worth briefly turning back to the explicit sexual experiences that Justine has throughout the film. Though Justine engages in heteronormative sexual activity, her sexuality is fetishistic in the sense that it seems that she appears to be unable to achieve climax without at least entertaining her cannibalistic urges. As previously recognized, Justine is aware that her sexual desires are not normal. However, she feels a need to pursue them regardless, a need that, as previously noted, is ultimately revealed to be genetic. Of course, Justine's sexual proclivities position Adrian's gay sex as far less taboo by comparison. Although I do not wish to speak to directorial intent, Ducournau's employment of the sexual taboo, shame, and the sick body reinforce cannibalism, both the cannibalism as Justine's sickness, and that which comes with it, such as the implied incest and the meat lust entangled with sexual desire, is that which is unacceptable and effectively redefines what the viewer likely sees as taboo. However, although Justine's bloodlust strongly mirrors substance addiction, it is important to briefly note that there are a myriad of other diseases that may be seen reflected in Justine's precarious circumstances. For instance, like Justine, many cancer patients carry a genetic proclivity to the disease, which may be further influenced or exacerbated by lifestyle choices and environmental factors. Furthermore, Sophia Monks-Kaufman sees an eating disorder reflected in Justine's bloodlust, such as bulimia nervosa. However, regardless of the sickness that one sees most reflected in Justine's journey, it is evident that her position as a sick character complicates her monstrosity. Although many characters in horror are the victims of illness and disease, the parallels that Ducournau establishes between Alexia and Justine's cannibalism and real-world sicknesses arguably permit Justine to be viewed as uniquely fully human and fully monster. Through the subjective perspective of Ducournau's lens, the development of Justine and Alexia's sicknesses affords the sister's grace, not only providing a quote-unquote raw perspective on sexuality and femininity, but also speaking more broadly to the complexities of corporeal existence, complicating mind-body dualism, and shedding light on moral judgments often levied against the sick. So my works cited is there in a QR code, but other than that, you can feel free to contact me if you want to talk about this. Like I said, not fully fleshed out yet, but I really love this movie and would love to chat more about it. Thank you.
Okay, so our final speaker on this panel is Shataparni Bhattacharya, also from Indiana University, Bloomington. And her presentation is on gendered monstrosity on the restoration stage.
All right, hello. I'd like to preface this by saying that this paper is part of my process of thinking through what will probably become the theory section of my dissertation. So I'm definitely still trying to work through those multi-textured ideas. So I'd be very grateful for, incisive questions, suggestions, critiques, etc. In May 1660, after the restoration of Charles II to the throne of England, the playhouses reopened after 18 years, and the patents for all the stock plays, which is plays that had been written before then and were widely performed already, such as Shakespeare, Marlowe, etc., were divided between two companies: Thomas Killigrew's King's Company, which existed from 1660 to 1682, and William Davenant's Duke's Company, which existed from 1660 to 1682 as well. It was also mandated that the companies would hire actresses and would perform their plays in indoor playhouses. With the arrival of the actress on the English stage in 1660, the mimetic representation of female evil underwent a transformation. Once villainesses could be embodied by actresses, the figure of the actress became a visible and sensual embodiment of both physical allure and moral corruption. The presence of the sexualized female body on stage disrupted the distance and detachment once provided by male actors playing women, confronting the audience directly with the monster herself, charged with both sexuality and potential wickedness. The first English play performed for the public with a role enacted by an actress is widely considered to be a production of Shakespeare's Othello by Thomas Killigrew's King's Company on December 8, 1660, in which the role of Desdemona was performed by Margaret Hughes. The first villainous role played by an actress was probably Mary Betterton's Lady Macbeth in the 1664 production of Macbeth by the Duke's Company. It would not be until 1671, however, that the play-going audience would meet their first original villainess in Isabella, played once again by Mary Betterton in John Crown's Charles VIII. Finally, in 1676, Mary Lee would play another Isabella, the tyrannical Queen of Spain, in Afra Ben's Abdelazar, the first villainess played by an actress in a play written by a female playwright. My paper begins in the early second decade of the Restoration. What I'm attempting here is an articulation of a framework of feminine monstrosity understood through gender and performance, or gendered performance, or the performance of gender on the Restoration stage. This paper is not going to have a close reading of any one singular play. My project is to identify a dialectical relationship between the historical texture that informs the cultural productions of the theater and the performative strategies through which gender was constructed and maintained as a form of state control. I'm interested in the plays and performances' explorations of female monstrosity and sexuality, animated by political, legal, and social developments. For example, how did the shifting configurations of public and private, subject and object, marriage laws and gender roles relate to the development and evolution of specific monstrous character types in dramatic texts? To what end were these monstrous feminine character types deployed within plays to either challenge or yield to social norms and discipline certain identities, positionalities, or behaviors? Or how did dramatists manipulate the figure of the monster to secure endorsement from the audience while strategically presenting contrary opinions? In beginning to answer these questions, I found it useful to categorize the female characters in Restoration plays across three kinds of monstrosities: that which was feared, reviled, and dreaded, that which was scorned, mocked, and ridiculed, and that which was attractive, desirable, and coveted, but by being so, revealed the forbidden nature of those desires. While the first two categories are representations of identities, behaviors, and positionalities that needed policing and disciplining to maintain the period's fictions of stability, the last category offers monstrosity as an agential articulation of reform, alternate possibilities, and boundary crossing to instances of social violence. I turn to Willow White's articulation of feminist comedy as a type of insider humor among women that draws on their shared experiences and binds them together as a group within a specific cultural, social, and historical moment. I expand and extend White's approach towards late 18th century comedy into drama more broadly in order to frame my analysis of Restoration theater through gender. While I reject notions of biological essentialism playing a part in the work of the female playwrights or the actresses, my project acknowledges and is informed by the gendered experiences of individuals who were perceived as women within the available historical conventions of the Restoration, while also acknowledging that this gender perception does not imply the transparent legibility of a body as belonging to a woman or otherwise. Rather, I follow Judith Butler's model of gender as, quote-unquote, radically independent of sex, where it, and I quote, becomes a free-floating artifice with the consequence that man and masculine might just as easily signify a female body as a male one, and woman and feminine, a male body as easily as a female one, unquote. The illusion of an abiding gendered self is generated through the repeated performances of certain acts and stylization of a body rather than a locus of agency. Gender in my project is constituted by performative acts within larger historical as well as specific theatrical contexts and is constructed through specific corporeal acts while concealing the genesis of this construction, which, as we'll see later, is also how I'm framing monstrosity. The series of acts which are renewed, revised, and consolidated through time, in Butler's words, through which a body becomes a gender are not, however, the acts of the gendered body alone, but rather a shared experience. Thus, the gendering of a body occurs both through the acts performed by the body that convey meaning within a historical context, such as political sanctions, taboos, punitive consequences, etc., and through the shared experience of the performance by those around it, or in this context, the audience. Butler draws a parallel between the enactment of a play text and the enactment of a gendered body. Quote, just as a script may be enacted in various ways, and just as the play requires both text and interpretation, so the gendered body acts its part in a culturally restricted corporeal space and enacts interpretations within the confines of already existing directives, unquote. The danger of a misinterpretation of this enactment that either collapses the gendered body with some innate essence or dissociates the gendered body from some temporarily derealized essence, however, remains. I draw a connection between these possibilities of misinterpretation and Stephen Orgell's exposition of the early modern anti-theatrical fear of the interchangeability of sexes. Orgell locates the Renaissance anxiety surrounding the representation of female characters on stage by boy actors in the contemporary anatomical and scientific notion that the female was an incomplete version of the male, which developed to completeness when the transformation from female to male was achieved. The female then was the abject that had to be shed in order to achieve the natural transition from female to male. As an aside, I borrow the concept of abjection from Julia Kristeva, who defines the abject as that which does not respect borders, positions, and rules, disturbs identity, system, and order, and that which, because it threatens life, must be radically excluded from the place of the living and away from the body, which Barbara Creed also utilizes in her conception of the monstrous mother in The Monstrous Feminine. However, to the main point, this framework allowed for a potential unnatural and monstrous reversal of the male back into the female. In other words, I argue the horror of this reversal lies in the return of the abject. In the Renaissance, this fear of effeminization appears in the form of anti-theatrical writing that warns first that boys who perform the role of women will be transformed into their roles and play the part in reality. And second, that, and I quote, male spectators will be seduced by the impersonation and losing their reason will become effeminate, which in this case means they will lust not after the woman in the drama, which would be bad enough, but after the boy beneath the woman's costume, thereby playing the woman's role themselves, unquote. The assumption underlying these warnings, then, is that the transvestism of the stage can produce erotic desire in men, and that the basic essential form of erotic excitement in men is homosexual, and that indeed women are only a cover for men. As a corollary, because a female is an incomplete male, it is possible for her even, given enough excitement, to mutate naturally into the male. Orgel adds the caveat, however, that despite the anti-theatrical warnings, English Renaissance culture did not display a morbid fear of homosexuality, perhaps because it did not entail the risk of producing illegitimate offspring and was easier to desexualize. Homosexuality and sodomy arising from the erotic effects of the theater were not categories in themselves that invited persecution, but were perceived as symptoms that revealed the truth that theater, or was seen as revealing a truth, that theater is dangerous. The infidelity of women, on the other hand, carried graver sanctions, and the theater was dangerous in this regard because its erotic influence could transform women into quote-unquote whores. The transvestism of the Renaissance theater, then, allowed the ascribing of different interpretations of gender onto different bodies and behaviors. Lust, a symptom of effeminization, could be performed by a male body, and in doing so, transform the perceived gender of that body. On the other hand, lust in excess could also masculinize a female body, despite lust being being a characteristic recognized as female. This framework is useful in my analysis of how, in the Restoration, the body of the actress, recognized as female, could become a conduit for the circuit of desire. The assumed corporeality of the character through the body of the actress and the assumed verisimilitude of the characters and actresses was maintained not only by the performance on stage, but also the paratextual writings, scandals, and rumors that surrounded the personal lives of the actresses. The anxiety about the monstrous reversals that the body of the actress was always already poised to initiate in the audience was mirrored in the monstrous reversals that the character herself was capable of initiating within the plot of the play. And this, as I will argue, was certainly a manifestation of the political and cultural anxieties of the period. After the Restoration, fear and hatred of monstrous women was aroused by keeping alive in public memory the tyrannical queens of the previous century. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen Mother of France, who oversaw St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of Protestants in 1572, and Mary Bloody Tudor, who was responsible for the persecution of Protestant heretics during her reign. By 1673, the brutality of Mary and Catherine had been rekindled in the Restoration audience's mind by the anxieties and the propaganda surrounding the ascendancy of Charles II's Catholic mistresses and the marriage of his brother and second in line to the throne, James, to the Italian Catholic princess Mary of Modena. The move towards greater toleration of religion in the 1670s is coupled with fears about a Catholic ascendancy, a fear that becomes closely entwined with the figure of the tyrannical Catholic queens. The dual threats of Catholicism and foreign influence culminated in the fears surrounding feminine inheritance, which became associated with the debasement of lineage. The figure of the power-hungry villainess was also imbued with sexual impropriety and deviance, and so feminine monstrosity and the exertion of female sexuality became conflated with religious heterodoxy. In the plays of the 1670s, such as Abdelazar, which I very briefly mentioned previously, and Elkanah Settle's The Empress of Morocco, the power-hungry, lascivious Catholic tyrant is also the queen mother, leading to the motif of the monstrous mother. The monstrous mother harkened back to the memory of Henrietta Maria, whose popularity preceding and during the civil wars had not yet been relegated to a distant past, and who was instrumental in setting up Charles II's royal court in exile. While the first decade of the Restoration saw the writing and production of royalist plays, Anne Hermanson illustrates that dissatisfaction with the court during the second decade, as well as the emergence of a new cohort of playwrights who had no obligation to continue performing their apologies to the king for their supposed betrayals during the Civil War and interregnum, unlike their forerunners in the previous decade, led to a canon of plays in the 1670s that were strongly critical of the monarchy. These plays were haunted by the specter of the late Henrietta Maria in the figure of the monstrous Queen Mother. Additionally, in horror plays, the contaminating presence of the monstrous female in the dynastic unit is represented as an omen of severe social dislocation, akin to the images of monstrous births in the 16th and 17th century political rhetoric. Surely, the questions of unnatural female rule and patrilineal discord must also be understood in reference to John Knox's The First Blast of the Trumpet Against the Monstrous Regiment of Women, 1558. Knox's First Blast of the Trumpet, a polemic against the unnatural and monstrous rule of female sovereigns, was reprinted in 1687. The polemic defended the right of the nobility to resist tyranny and bad governance in defense of the people, and declared the right of the private individual to actively resist when the ruler failed to live up to his God-given responsibilities. His primary targets were Mary Tudor, married to King Philip of Spain, and Mary I, or Mary Stuart of Scotland, married to King Francis II of France. Knox argued that God's signs were misread, leading to the wrong magistrates being chosen and the subjection of the people of Scotland and England to the bondage of strangers, or the yoke of the foreigner. In Knox's philosophy, the consent of the people to the monarch's rule was irrelevant when such rule was ungodly. Women could not hold the title of a monarch at all by the laws of nature and by biblical law, and thus any woman who held power would by default be illegitimate and a usurper. And not included in this paper, but also really interesting distinctions between what makes a usurper and what makes a tyrant, like what different kinds of monstrosities define those categories of bad governance. Interestingly, by deeming a woman's decision to agree to rule as sinful, Knox's polemic inadvertently revealed a capacity for intentional evil within woman's ambition. So one that was not an innate essence of female evil, but one that was consciously a decision to be sinful. A trait that I find would become a hallmark of the power-hungry villainess in the plays of the Restoration. Knox's polemic makes repeated use of the epithet of Jezebel for the female ruler, thus directing a charge of licentiousness at power-hungry women. This remains true for the depiction of the wanton, lascivious queen mothers of the Restoration plays. I argue that Knox's abiding influence works in conjunction with the more immediate concerns regarding the influences of Charles II's many mistresses on him. Placing the figure of the courtesan within the larger culture of restoration politics and religion reveals the proximity to power and the subsequent need to discipline any exertion of such power, not just in the authority awarded to the courtesan as an influence on the monarch and his decisions, but also in the authority she had in herself fashioning as a political figure. The marks of a courtesan's sinfulness carried out in private could become a public testament through the disfiguring marks left upon her face by sexually transmitted diseases, turning her abjected interiority into an exterior monstrosity that could serve as a warning to avoid both her person as well as this quote-unquote life of sin that was being punished through this monstrous external marker. With the arrival of the actress, the audience is forced to confront the abjectedness of a body that is read as feminine, performing in some aspects the monstrosities ascribed to a female nature within the historical conventions of the period, or in other aspects, a dissemblance that conceals but cannot amputate the monstrousness, and thus becomes in itself a monstrous dissemblance. When the hitherto hidden female desire is unveiled to represent a female interiority, the interiority is articulated by inscribing the identity on the sexualized body, which becomes monstrous through the double transgressions of unruly sexuality and unlawful political ambition. This representation becomes stronger when it is in collaboration with the actress, where the written text of a female playwright is embodied by the performance of another, creating a disruption in the phallocentric stability of political power. The monstrous body is symbolic of the cultural body, as we all know, spawned by cultural unease towards difference, and the body politic, spawned by the policing of these lines of difference. However, the monster which terrifies and indicts can, and obviously I'm quoting Cohen here, evoke potent escapist fantasies. The simultaneous repulsion and attraction is one of the delights of the sexually charged monstrosity in the actress's bodies. The monstrous body and stage presence of the actress reveal several ideas in flux during the restoration, such as the public and private and the subject and the object, which I've spoken about before. The actress as monster, while it reckons with the possibility of difference, also challenges the assumptions of verisimilitude that underlie the misinterpretations of gender performance that seek an innate gendered essence in the performing body that is seemingly expressed through the acts it performs. Acts that only carry meaning within the social, political, and cultural configurations of the larger context of the restoration, its intrigues, and its discontents, and within the theatricality of an evolving dramatic stage. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you all so much. So because we started a little bit late, we only have about 7 minutes for questions. So we might just kind of do one or two quick questions before I let you all go for lunch. Do I just take this off, or is there another microphone? Oh, you have one separate. Okay, excellent. So I think, yeah.
My question is for Kate, and it's in regarding, you mentioned eating disorders briefly in regards to like addiction with raw, and I thought that was really interesting to think about like how family values, especially like with women, like mothers and sisters, and how they can kind of influence, I'm thinking more of the mom right now, and how she really enforced this restriction, which I guess in the case of the movie it's very good because she didn't want them to like reach the sickness, but I think it's very interesting to think out how the mother restricts, but the sister indulges. And also I think, sorry, this is like very rambly, it's kind of all over the place, but both the mother and Alexia are aware of this condition, of this genetic sickness, and yet they do not warn Justine in advance. And the mother, I guess, makes an excuse that they're vegetarian and really tries to protect her from this illness, yet the sister forces her to forces, honestly, her to indulge. She brings her to the car crash. She keeps trying to involve her in this addiction. And I think it's really interesting. I think maybe it can do a lot with like the rebellion against like the mother figure, but also just like, I don't know, just like these, like it's really interesting to think about like eating disorders in the context of like family values. But I'm just really curious what you think about, I guess, that larger context, but yeah, sorry, it's very rambling.
No, of course. Let me see if I can get this here. So there's a couple of different threads there. I honestly just ran into the eating disorder reading very, not long ago at all. And I was like, oh, darn, because I wanted to do more with it. And I just didn't come across it until kind of too late in the development of this paper and presentation. But I agree with you in that it is so interesting. And anecdotally in my life, I have seen that kind of this well-meaning mother figure, right, kind of projecting these values onto their daughters and kind of seeing this generational curse amongst people that I know. And usually it comes from a really well-meaning place. So I think that that's interesting to think about and kind of mapping this onto Raw. Blake and I had a conversation the other day about, so a lot of these ideas I'm going to attribute back to him, about this idea of something else I wanted to put more into the paper that I just did not have time to, is this idea of the mother and the parents being caregivers, right? And then Justine moving away from that into a facility where it's not only is the opposite of caretaking going on, but just as you said, we have Alexia who I almost feel like I kind of read Alexia's actions as this seeking of companionship, right? Of this idea of not wanting to be alone. And also I feel like that maps onto eating disorders too, in this idea of people, I don't want to speak too broadly, but this idea of wanting to fit into a societal construct, right? In terms of changing your corporeality, even if it doesn't actually end up how, because there is this warped perception that people have. So even if it doesn't end up actually doing anything positive, there seems to be this kind of what am I trying to say? This idea, just kind of rambly as well, that people are they're seeking something in that, I guess is my point. Just like Alexia, I don't read Alexia as evil, even though what she's doing is evil too, right? There's this distinction of she's doing these really awful things by getting Justine to engage in this proclivity that she knows she's the one who forces this rabbit kidney down her throat. She knows that it's going to result in what it results in. But I do think that there is this interesting, just as someone with an eating disorder is seeking something from that, Alexia is also seeking something selfishly by getting Justine into this whole thing. And even though she's selfish in doing so, there's almost kind of I was saying about some of Justine's actions, there's this empathy that's kind of fostered, which is really complex. And that is also a very ranty answer. And I don't think it's a very good answer, but there's just so much there to play with. And I do wish I could have touched more on the eating disorder component of this, because I think it is also just such an interesting thread.
So we have 2 minutes left. So if you guys can be really efficient with your question and answer, we can do one more question.
Okay, I'll try to be efficient because I see people eating. Okay, so magnificent presentations. Kate, is the problem framed by not only the camera but also the surrounding characters? Is the problem more of what she's eating or what they're eating versus the excess of eating, because they are both females and we're not supposed to be sexually active or, excess anything?
Okay, just to make sure that I have your question right here, are you talking about in terms of, are we going back to this eating disorder thread, or I just want to see what you're...
Just eating, period.
Okay, is the problem, well, I think that a lot of it lies in the transgression of the fact that what they're eating is taboo, but there does seem to be there clearly is this course set throughout the movie, right, where it starts where she's total vegetarian and that's just meat, and meat is, it's weird but it's fine. You get to this scene where they're at the Adrian and Justine are at this gas station, and Justine gets this really meaty sub, and she's like, and it seems to give Adrian a little, like, he's like, oh, this is weird, this is strange. Same like when she is eating the raw, I believe it's chicken. It's like, oh, this is weird and this is strange, but it's not like problematic in the same way. So I would argue that like what they are eating is very important because it aligns with the level of consumption, right? Like her eating a raw sub and then a whole chicken breast, and then it escalates to the point where Alexia obviously kills Adrian and then eats part of his body, and that level of consumption is also reflected in what. In the fact that she is eating another human being. And so I think that they work hand in hand together, and work to complicate, like you were saying, and I wish I could delve into it further because I know we're out of time, but this idea of the monstrous feminine and the fact that they are both, like, that this is a uniquely gendered experience. And like you were saying, with like there is this like dynamic with gender of like women shouldn't consume too much, and like how does that play on to like the idea kind of like that you talk about a little bit, this idea of the overly sexual woman and that being a consumptive thing, and again the tying back in with Justine's sexuality. But that's all to say, again, a very rambly answer because I'm just very nervous about being pressed for time. But this idea that I think that what they are eating directly ties to the level of consumption, and I don't think that you can extricate one from the other.
Okay, since we are out of time, if you guys have more questions, maybe you could maybe like have a chat over lunch. That might be a nice way to kind of share ideas and share thoughts. But could we thank our speakers again for an excellent panel? All the papers were amazing. I really enjoyed it so much, so thank you so much.